Welcome back to our community, Justice Thomas.
Thank you.
I remember clearly 24 years ago when you were the keynote speaker at this very dinner. I was a recent graduate of the Pepperdine Law School, about to start a clerkship with Judge Edith Jones on the Fifth Circuit. I don't expect you to remember this, but that evening, our mutual friend Ken Starr, who's here tonight, introduced us. He said, Justice Thomas, when he's done clerking with Judge Jones, I hope you will consider him for an interview for your position.
I considered you.
And he did. True to his word, Judge Jones wrote me a letter. I spent 90 minutes interviewing with his clerks. I spent 45 wonderful minutes with Justice Thomas. He interviewed 6 that year. He hired 4. I was 5th.
Well, but who did I hire, though?
You hired some good people, but who'd you miss?
I missed you. I mean, it's my, yeah. Hey,
My therapist and I are not bitter about this anymore. We're getting over it. But I will tell you that it looks right now like the interview shoe is on the other foot, sir. Welcome to payback. In fact, why don't we start this conversation with the other panelist who was granted the opportunity to clerk for you. You just sit tight a bit, think about what you've done. You're in a timeout. As I mentioned, we have with us Brittney Lane Kubisch, one of our stars at Pepperdine, who does know what it's like to clerk for Justice Thomas. So Brittney, why don't you tell the audience what you did after graduating from Pepperdine before clerking for Justice Thomas, and why you sought a clerkship with him specifically?
So immediately after I graduated from Pepperdine Law School, which was key to clerking for Justice Thomas because they teach really good law here, I clerked for Judge O'Scanlan on the Ninth Circuit, and then I clerked for Judge Sutton on the Sixth Circuit. I went back to a law firm for a little while and worked for 2 years. And in that time, actually lost my mom, and I thought I had applied for the Supreme Court 3 days before my mom passed away, for the second to the last time. And I thought, there is no way I'm going to apply for the court again. Like, I just want to be with my family. And a friend of mine who was then clerking for Justice Alito, who was a former Judge Sutton clerk, she reached out to me and she said, you have to apply to clerk for Justice Thomas because I think you will be a great fit. And it was not the first person. I had a co-clerk with Judge O'Scanlan who went on to clerk for Justice Scalia who said, you have Thomas Clerk written all over you.
Why do you think that is? What is it about you that had Thomas written all over you?
I'm waiting. I'm
waiting
waiting just like you.
I think it was just, they said that it was, I had a very firm view of what the law was, and I stuck to it even if it wasn't the most popular view or the view that would move the majority of people. And really, then I went to interview with the justice, and I was sitting with him in his chambers, and he had asked me about my family. I told him about my mom, and he said, I work my clerks really hard, but the one thing about when you clerk for me is you are representing those people like your mom, your dad, those people who never get a chance to come up here and clerk at the court. But they need someone to give a voice, and you do all that hard work for them. And I was like, this is the person that I want to clerk for. And this is the person where I can live out the mission of the university, really.
Absolutely.
And then she hired me.
And then she hired you. You hired well, Brittney. So a day in the life of clerking for Justice Thomas.
It varied from day to day. On court days, we'd come in and we'd talk about cases with the justice, and then we'd watch oral argument, and they'd go up on the bench, and afterwards we'd discuss the oral argument and see if it changed anything, and then my co-clerks and I would sit at our computers and type away, researching and writing.
Mm-hmm. We're very structured, so there's a lot of, we don't do things haphazardly. So she skipped a lot of steps and a lot of
If I listed all the steps, we'd be up here until
yeah, we'd
next
be up
week.
here all day. Yeah. There's a lot of steps.
Well, you've remarked on numerous occasions that the best part of being a Supreme Court justice is the clerks. Tell us about that. What caused you to think that's the best part of the job?
Well, we are very selective about who we want. I do not
Clearly.
hire clerks. And I have on the door into my office, I have 4 hooks that you would normally see in a locker room. They're very nicely done. There's a sign underneath, and it says, "Hang egos here." Mm. And what's important about that is that we work as a group. We don't work individually. It's not like you pick your preferred clerk and give that clerk the work. We work as a team. Mm-hmm. Example of that is that if Brittney's working on something and I email Brittney about that, and we do everything by email, internal email, and I will copy her 3 co-clerks. Mm-hmm. And when she responds, she will copy the same 3 co-clerks. So we don't have like internal secrets or games. And one of the things I promise these kids when they come on board is that they'll leave with clean hands, clean hearts, and clear consciences. Mm-hmm. So they would have to keep confidences, but there are no secrets that they have to keep. Mm-hmm. So I was sitting this morning having breakfast with Brittney and Maddie and Mark, and I thought about it as we're sitting on the beach having breakfast. That was pretty cool. And having on the beach in Malibu having breakfast. So that I could sit there and I could look at her, I could look at Mark, I could look at Maddie, and there's nothing that she's burdened with, that she's done in a very tough year. And over the years, we've been able to have kids who are proud of things. But, you know, it really matters to me that we get young people like Brittney. And I think, you know, I've got 2 more Pepperdine clerks. I don't know why they transferred, but they did. I have the number 2 in Brittney's class, Russell Balicki, and who's with me now. Brittney said she drove him out. And I had David Morrell,
right. Yeah.
who's also a clerk. So you're not, I've tried to make up for missing you.
I appreciate that.
That's called a grovel.
You're one of the few justices that routinely hires from outside the elite law schools. Tell us why and kind of your clerk selection process.
Well, why is, you know, we say a lot of things, and there are a lot of things that I've heard. We talk about, well, we are going to be fair, or we're going to choose people on merit, or everybody has a chance. The court, if you look at it, is all Ivy League. The members of the court were all from Harvard or Yale Law School. Justice Ginsburg graduated from Columbia, but she's also attended Harvard. Mm-hmm. The law clerks tend to reflect that. And so the default generally has been the Ivies and then schools that are similar to the Ivies. You know, that's fine, but they're smart kids in a lot of places. The other thing I like is I like kids who are hungry, kids who are really still striving. They don't feel like they're the noblesse oblige, that they are entitled, that this is the natural order of things. And I've had clerks from LSU, I've had them from Creighton, I've got a young woman now, the first ever from the University of Florida Law School. Mm-hmm. These kids are tough. I mean, this young woman, she went to Covenant College. I'd never even heard of Covenant College. And she was number 1 in her class at University of Florida Law School. I'll pit her against anybody, any place, anytime, just like Brittney. The young man that I had who started here at Pepperdine, Russell, went to Taylor University. I've never heard of Taylor University. Huh?
It's in Indiana.
Well, thank you. I mean,
he was one of my students, so I had to memorize that.
Yeah. So I mean, but again, Russell is a kid. There's still fire in there. Right. And they're also, I like kids from modest circumstances, mm-hmm. who didn't have it sort of, the skids greased for them. We say we believe in those things. And I think it doesn't end at the door of the Supreme Court. It's their country too, it's their constitution. And I think a lot of times that the regular people, their values and the things they believe in are not reflected in the building where I work.
Right.
And this is a way of making sure that the things we say we believe in. There's a lot of talking about what we believe in, and this is one way to actually live it. Now, as far as how I select my clerks, I do it randomly. I am very arbitrary about how I do it. First of all, the kids have to have a lot of horsepower. Mm-hmm. You're kidding yourself if they don't have to, if you don't, and you try to find that out. I mean, you look for indicators of that. But a lot of horsepower is required because we push hard. Mm-hmm. I asked my clerks one year how many hours a day they work, and she said 16 and a half. And I said, well, that's reasonable. But I do request that they not sort of, like die or anything during the term.
Reasonable request?
Well, I mean, so far so good. But we push pretty hard. We are the least efficient chambers. I mean, we're very redundant, and there are a lot of things that we do. I mean, Brittney was expecting a child at the end of the term, so I was starting to feel guilty about that. She was putting some long hours in.
Right.
And so you need the horsepower, and I need kids who are not jerks.
That's what it was. I now know.
Well, we all
That's
have faults.
What it was. Okay.
No, you were up against, some years, I don't know if you know who Naomi Rao is.
I know of her.
Okay, well, Naomi just went on the DC circuit. And I happened to be, she was one of my law clerks. And the way that we hired her was we were having lunch at a big room like, not quite this big at the Senate one day with my law clerks. And as we were leaving, one of the law clerks stopped to talk to this young woman who was having a sandwich by herself. And I said, who is that? He said, well, she's a classmate. And I said, well, that's great. She said, well, you should know her. I said, why? He said, you interviewed her for a job. I said, why didn't I hire her? He said, I don't know.
Maybe she was a jerk.
No. I didn't. So I had him call her and asked her if she would be interested. And the reason I didn't hire her is numbers. I had hired a young man who just came on the 9th Circuit, was #1 in her class. So she was up against him, and there was nothing wrong with her. She was just against somebody who was. And you were up against Cy, Caleb, John Yu, Tom Lee, and Eric Grant. Good luck.
I appreciate it. And all of those guys are stellar.
Yeah,
Stellar.
So, what do you do? It's an embarrassment of riches.
I don't think any of them's a president, though. I'm just saying.
Well, you showed them.
I did. So, Brittney, you went to Harvard for undergrad, 4.0. You could have gone anywhere in the country for law school. Pepperdine, in its vision statement, says that Pepperdine intends to be a university that's known for the integration of faith and learning. Why did you choose Pepperdine? Was it due to any part of that? And what did you find about the integration of faith and learning here at Pepperdine?
That was probably the single reason that I applied to Pepperdine and ultimately chose to come here was its faith-based mission, its Christian mission, because I had been at Harvard. I had wanted to go to Harvard since I was 8 years old. I went to Harvard and I thought, this is going to be this incredible experience. And it was an incredible educational experience, but it was an educational experience that denied my faith. My second year at Harvard, I went to write a paper in a class where we had to do some independent research in psychology, which was my undergraduate degree. And I wanted to write a paper doing a meta-analysis of these studies of the efficacy of prayer. They were double-blind studies, totally methodologically perfect, scientifically. And when I proposed it to my professor, she said, if you do that paper, the highest grade I will give you is a B, because anything involving prayer is not science. And that was just the experience I had throughout my time at Harvard. To be the feeling I got was that people felt if you believed in God, then that was antithetical to being smart. And I didn't want the same experience when I went for a legal education. I didn't initially want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a high school teacher. And then I felt called to be a lawyer. And because I felt called, I really felt called to be a Christian lawyer first. And Pepperdine was the place. I came to campus the first day, and I got the warmest welcome. In fact, I sat in on this guy's torts class who was just such a stellar rock star with my dad that I was like, I have to come here. And now that torts professor is going to be president of the university.
I remember meeting you and your father as well on that trip. Justice Thomas, as Brittney mentioned, we are a Christian university. Recently, some have expressed concern about a judge's religious convictions. Specifically, during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearing 2 years ago, one senator, who shall remain nameless, but her name rhymes with Feinstein, told the Catholic nominee that, quote, the dogma lives loudly within you, and that's of concern. Are there instances in which the judge's religious convictions should be taken into account when considering whether the judge is qualified?
I thought we got away from religious tests. So, not really. Not only that, I don't think that I know a single judge who has allowed religion to interfere with their jobs. Because I remember having these discussions with Justice Scalia, who was a practicing Catholic, obviously. And he felt the way I did, that it would be a violation of his oath to somehow allow his faith to displace the law, because we took an oath to enforce the law and interpret it impartially. And he took that very seriously. And if you want to look at one way it works out, look how it backwashes in this jurisprudence. He thought you had no right to come up with theories that allowed your personal opinions to seep into the law. So you will see him not liking substantive due process, not liking multi-factor tests that allow you to have whatever outcome you want, totality of the circumstances. He wanted things where the law leads you to the conclusion, not allows you to impose your personal views. So both of us, and I feel very strongly that we have no right to do that. But similarly, I think it's illegitimate for others to do that. And just as an aside, I think it's really interesting that people in a profession where we all take an oath, that they would look at people who have strong faith as somehow not good people, when if you're an atheist, what does an oath mean? If you are a Christian and you believe in God, what does an oath mean? Do you say at the end of it, so help me God? And you have taken an oath to God. And as Mother Teresa said, it's between you and God. So you have given your word. It's one thing, I give my word to you, which I would keep. But when you give your word to God, is that special? And I think if you are faithful, you think it is special. And you work doubly hard to make sure you live up to it. And so I don't think, not only doesn't it interfere or in any way, and it actually enhances your view of the oath. And second thing I would say about faith is that this business, particularly in Washington, is a tough place. I've been in these jobs now for almost 40 years. Justice Scalia asked me one time, Clarence, I had left the church in 1968. He said, why did you, and I left the seminary, I left the church, I stopped going to church, I was bordering anti-religious. He said, what brought you back? And I said, life. I said, I ran away in 68 and crawled back in 93. I think faith allows you, it gives you the strength to do it the right way. It gives you an outlook that shows you your place in the universe, as opposed to thinking that you are the anointed, that you are called to do this job and to do it in a certain way. But it's not you. You are not God. You may have taken an oath to God, but you are not God. Right. And I think the danger in that building, if you do not have humility or find it someplace, your ego can really expand quickly. Right. I mean, you've been there. It is the marble palace. It is a dangerous place. And I think you need to, I go to Mass in the morning before I go to work, and someone said, why do you do that? I think when you start on your knees, if you start the day on your knees, you approach your job differently from when you start thinking that somebody anointed you to impose your will on others. There's something about being on your knees. It's hard to think that, well, you are superior when you're on your knees. So I think faith actually allows you and strengthens you, encourages you, sustains you, and orders your life in a way that you do your job better.
Well, thank you for that. I agree. On Valentine's Day, February 14th this year, I got a call from Ed Biggers here, the regent, the chair of the Board of Regents, offering me the position. The next day I wrote a letter to the entire board saying I'm going to begin every day on my knees in service of Pepperdine, but before the throne of God, and I appreciate you doing that the same way as well. Let's fast forward to 20 years from now. 20 years from now at your retirement party.
I'm not.
No, you're not going to argue with me. 20,
I know, but I'm not retiring.
20 years?
No.
30 years?
No.
Let's fast forward to the time at which you go home.
Well, I wouldn't have any say about that.
I've got a hypothetical question for you.
Uh-huh.
On that day, living or dead, who would you like? Let me finish the question. Living or dead, who would you like to speak at your funeral or at your retirement party, and what would they say? What would you hope they said? You've talked about your place in the world. When it's time to celebrate the life and the career of Justice Thomas, who would you want speaking? What would you want them to say?
Somebody alive, number one.
I just mean from the, you've talked about your grandfather and how important he was to you.
My wife and I talk about this. Just say, he did his job, and one of my current law clerks told me something that's really stuck with me. That really was humbling recently. She said that the thing that really surprised her, said, you do this job with such joy. But where do you think joy comes from? Where do you think it comes from? It doesn't come from Washington, D.C. You think it comes from the negativity in the air, the hard work? No. comes from God.
Amen.
And I just think that you say, I've had such a great life. Just say, he did his job, and may he rest in peace.
Brittney?
I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it, though. It's time, you got to get back to work.
What would...
You got to get to work.
Yeah, I heard that a lot.
Brittney, the last comment is yours. What would you say at that retirement party about Justice Thomas?
If he was retiring, I'd chide him for doing that.
I told you she hired me. She said she didn't realize that Lincoln freed them all.
So what would you say?
In all seriousness, boss, I'd say, one, you already mentioned, he promises his clerks at the beginning of the year that we will be able to look him in the eye at the end of the year with a clear conscience. And I really have to thank you for that, because I know there were clerks on the court that were not able to look their justices in the eye with a clear conscience, that they did the best job they could to find out what the right answer was, not what they wanted the answer to be, but what the right answer was in every case. And the second thing I thank you for is I thank you for showing me what it's like to be a good person before you are a good lawyer. Every day I saw you walk into the building, you knew the name of every single employee, you knew their kids, you knew what their kids were doing. Every other clerk on the court, no matter where they fell in the ideological spectrum, their second favorite justice besides their own to go to lunch with was you. You made everyone feel welcome, from the person who helped work the elevators all the way up to the clerks, to the other justices across the ideological spectrum. And for me personally, I did get pregnant with our first child while I was clerking. The night Mark and I found out, it was unexpected, and he's dying of embarrassment that I said that right now. But it was unexpected, and I cried because I was absolutely terrified to tell you I was doing the biggest, most important job that I was ever going to do in my life. But I went in and I told you, and you were so excited. And after that moment, I felt so relieved, and I felt permission to be joyful about our baby girl. And every time I forgot that my job was a job, just a job, even if it was an important one, you would remind me. So I was 19 weeks pregnant. We were approaching the end of the term, and I got scared because we stopped feeling Miss Maddie move inside of me. And so I tried to slip out without the boss knowing for a doctor appointment at 4 p.m. And my co-clerks told him, and I'm running to the doctor, and I get a phone call from the boss, and I answer the phone, and I say, "Oh, boss, I'm sorry, this thing I'm working on, I'm doing this research, I'll get it to you in a couple of hours. I just had to step out for a minute." And he's like, "Slow down. I am not calling to ask you about any cases. I heard that you're going to the doctor to see about the baby. You call me immediately when you hear. I want to know that she's okay." And fortunately, she was okay. She just had turned around backwards and was protesting
all that work you were doing.
All the work I was doing. But in that moment, he reminded me, that child has an immortal soul and is the greatest thing that I will ever do in my life, far more important than a job.
Don't you agree?
Oh, I totally agree.
Amen.
And that's when you showed us the sonograms.
Yes.
On your phone.
Yep.
That was the cutest thing. The joy of it is clerks aren't your servants. They're your family. And what was going on is family. I mean, look at her this morning.
Yeah.
I mean, that big yellow hat on.
Well, Justice
I'm not
Thomas,
biased, but she's like the cutest baby in the whole world.
Well, you're supposed to say that.
Justice
Are you
Thomas,
stopping already?
I got a stop sign 5 minutes ago.
Where?
She came and went, and then she came and went.
Well, if you keep going, she'll have to come back. But you're the president now.
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet. August 1st.
Can they retract it, or have they signed papers?
We've signed the papers. It just hasn't
Well,
started.
then you keep going.
I'm about to keep going. What I was going to say is, Brittney mentioned about you and the clerks being family. We're so grateful for your multiple return visits. This is your third time to Pepperdine. We hope you consider this to be part of your family. We believe what you believe, and we welcome you as a member of our family. We couldn't leave this evening without him getting his own Pepperdine jersey. The 106th Supreme Court Justice of the United States, Justice Clarence Thomas.
Thank you. Give him my shirt.
Yeah, look, I give you your shirt. Can we get a picture here?
Oh, wait a minute. I've got a lot going on here. Put that in there. There you go. Now, wait a minute. Let me get my jersey up. There you go.
Gotta get the name in the back. Get the name, Thomas, there. You honor us with your presence. Thank you, Brittney.
Oh, of course.
Can we go this way?